For those of you who don't know me, my name is Richard Ehrlich. I'm a long-time member of the Guild. And before I became a freelance writer, I worked in publishing, which I think is probably how I hoodwinked them into letting me come tonight. We're talking about self-publishing, which is when I began in publishing, self-publishing was usually called vanity publishing, and it was considered in a different realm, not legitimate, not something that serious writers would ever do. Now, of course, things have changed, and that's why we're here tonight. We're going to listen to 4 panelists, beginning with Jonathan White, who has experience in just about every aspect of the book world. He started as a bookseller, first at Dillon's and then at Stanford. Stanford's in Australia. He worked for OUP, and on returning to the UK, he's worked at various places, most recently at Chrysalis, which became Anova, and then Pavilion Books. You see how Chrysalis developed, changes into other things. He then went to Phaidon to do business development there, and for the last year or so has worked for Troubadour/Matador in Leicestershire, which is one of the leading companies in this field, the field of self-publishing. Next, Michael Phillips, who has run a small design consultancy for nearly 40 years, producing print-on-demand books for self-publishers as well as larger publishers. And more recently, he set up a new project called Archetype Books that seeks to, in their words, bridge the gap between an author's idea and the final product. And the next speaker is his first product. Yeah. Bill Sewell, who opened the Place Below restaurant in Cheapside. Anyone ever been there? Great place. I loved it. In 1989, and now runs the 2 places, Cafe at All Saints in Hereford, and is it Michael House or Michaelis?
Michael House.
Michael House in Cambridge. Michael House Cafe. He wrote 2 vegetarian cookery books in the 1990s, and has just published a fully illustrated omnivore cookbook using crowdfunding on Kickstarter, where it became the 2nd most funded UK cookbook on the site. Very impressive. And finally, Tim Lewis is the host of Begin Self-Publishing, of the Begin Self-Publishing podcast. He's interviewed over 55 people in the course of 112 episodes about every aspect of self-publishing. He also does social media marketing for the Alliance of Independent Authors, and is the author of 3 science fiction novellas and 3 fantasy novels, all self-published.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so a diverse group, all with lots to say. We want to allow plenty of time for questions at the end, so we're going to move right in. No more from me. No.
Okay. I did actually have a handout which I was supposed to put out beforehand, and I've completely forgotten. So if you'd actually, which gives a overview of what I'm going to talk about, and as I've got nowhere near enough time to talk about everything I would like to talk about, you'll have to have a look at that and see what the other parts which I didn't quite get to are about. So I work for Troubadour, and I run the sales and marketing department there. Troubadour is a publishing house which runs an imprint called Matador, and Matador is an imprint which is entirely dedicated to self-publishing and to publishing for authors. We also have some other imprints. We bought the Book Guild in 2015, which is partnership publishing, which is slightly different from the self-publishing side of things, and I'm not really going to talk about that tonight because it is different and I've not got enough time to get through Matador, really. But the whole idea of Troubadour and what I'm trying to show in my handout is that Troubadour as a publishing house, Matador as a publishing imprint, entirely duplicates mainstream publishing houses. It started out as a publishing services and for academic publishers in the late 1980s, and then in the 1990s started to get involved with self-publishing and the idea that actually all these services could be offered direct to authors who were interested in self-publishing and wanted someone who would deal with everything basically of that a publishing house does, but you can pick and choose exactly what parts you want to. On our website you can see all of the various services, and each of them has a price, and you can sign up to any of those you want and not the bits you don't want. As this became more and more important to Troubadour, in 1999 they launched Matador, which is the imprint now which we do all of the publishing under, and that gradually has become the biggest part of the company and where almost all of our business happens. We still do some publishing services for academic publishers, but it's a very small part of what we do. So what I thought I'd try and do is to try and take you through the process of the self-publishing process that we do, and just give you a very quick overview of what it is and which bits you can choose or not. It does follow, as you can see, the basic diagram which is there, which takes you through a publishing process, which is the mirror image of that which you would get at a publishing house, a mainstream publishing house. The difference is that you are our primary customer as the author, because we're charging you for all those services that you're doing, as opposed to a mainstream publishing house where, as we were talking about before, the primary customer is obviously the bookshop and the sales of that. So the author is very important, as in producing the work and things, but once it moves over into the editorial and then the sales and marketing side, it pretty much gets taken out of your control and will be entirely packaged and dealt with in the way that will make the most possible money for the publishing house, which you will get a royalty from. But this way, I mean, then we can't guarantee what the results will be, but we can actually say that all of the services that we offer are entirely put forward for you to decide what you want to do with it. We are there then to put that into operation, and we are basically reporting to you as to how well or otherwise we manage to do with that. So the process we'll take you through from start to finish is that we have a customer services team. If you approach us, we will then sort out with you a contract of whether you want to publish with us. Now, it isn't guaranteed that we will take you on, because as we operate a imprint, the Matador imprint, and as that Matador imprint within the self-publishing world has a reputation for very high quality, for producing books which we think are exact mirror images of what you would see from the mainstream publishing houses. The content is yours, but the production process is what we put into them. So we will not publish everything, because if we do not think it is of a sufficient quality that actually we can put our name to it, we won't do it either, because we feel we're going to put so much time and effort into it that it becomes, less financially successful for us, or we just think that it's not going to work with us, because at the end of the day people are going to be somewhat embarrassed about bringing it up. The main reason we have for turning books down is probably on the quality of the English, and that's the most obvious thing, is that when the customer services are reading through, and they will read some of we'll ask for a submission, but we do publish most of what we get coming into us, and that's the thing about self-publishing. We're there to provide the service, but you have the editorial content at the end of the day. So what will then happen is that the publishing house will take on the book, and the first thing we do is we set up a contract with you for, there'll be a production contract, a marketing contract, we will do an author questionnaire with you, all of the things that you would have with a mainstream publishing house, and within that you would choose the services that you want to take as part of your publishing process. On the production side, that will be everything from the copy edit, the proofread if you want those kind of things, the typeset, which we obviously have to do. We will do the cover design within the house, and we'll take you right the way through that publishing process. You decide how many copies of the book you want to print. We'll give you a quote on the printing of that, either as a print on demand way of printing, or if you want to get into the book trade, you'd need to take a printed quantity, and you need to have at least a couple of hundred books in order that we could then do the bit that I'm involved with, which is the sales and marketing side of the process. So you'll have a production controller who is set up with you at the time when we sign up contracts and we agree to publish the book, and you'll have a marketing controller for the book if you're taking the marketing services that we offer. You don't have to. If you have primarily your own marketing, you can, and you have an audience that you want to sell directly to. You don't have to sell or market to the book trade or to the media, but if you want to get your books into bookshops and onto, you can get them onto Amazon through a number of different methods, but if you want to get them into the book trade in the wider possible sense, you then need to take on some kind of trade marketing of selling the book to the book trade, and we'll do that. We have a sales representation company that we use, which we tie in with, and if you want a more active way of selling into the book trade, we can organise that. And then if you want your book to be noticed and to sell, you've probably got to do some kind of media marketing, and we have various packages of media marketing which we will use on your behalf depending on whether you sign up to those. We will also do social media marketing, we can produce marketing materials, we can do all of these various other processes which will tie into it. So everything that we do is a mirror image of what you would get at a publishing house, the type that I used to work for when I was in mainstream publishing. And the whole idea is that if you want to produce a book which will work in the book trade, we can take that on for you and sell and market it, and that the book that we will produce will be something that will sit very happily in a bookshop, and the idea of the production values on that book will be no different to you get on. So, I've just tried to bring a couple of them. Actually, we do comparatively few cookery books in the scale of things compared to other subject matters that we publish much more on. Not quite sure why that is. I have a background in cookery publishing, and that's but when I was actually looking to see what books I could bring, I had comparatively few, which are those. Most of what we do is, of course, non-illustrated fiction and non-fiction. That's what a lot of people choose as their self-publishing option, because the production costs are that much cheaper, you can get a that much better print price, and therefore you can sell comparatively more books, and you hope make more money out of it. But it is something we're certainly keen on doing more, and because of our in-house production design setup, we think that we can actually produce something which is very comparable to what the mainstream publishing houses are producing as their offering in the book trade. I've got a few figures because I was trying to that is kind of in very brief, the process that we have there. We take on every side of what you're doing, from sales, distribution. We have a distribution set up. One of the things about Matador is that if you publish with us, you have to have our ISBN prefix, because we are set up with the book trade through our distribution setup. We have all of the normal distribution setups of margins agreed with the major chains, and we have independents and that side of it. So in the old days, we used to do actually other people's ISBNs, which we were again talking about before. But that's why we don't do it anymore, because we need to be set up as a distributor of our books, and Matador are recognised, and people know when they're what we also very much are doing is setting up the metadata behind the book, and we're all Onyx compliant, and we supply all that into Nielsen, so that anyone in the book trade can order the Matador books, just like again they're ordering any other mainstream publishing house, and they'll know exactly where they're getting them from, and that the discounts that we have agreed with them as the way that all publishers work. So, I'm afraid that is a really, really brief, but I am already running out of time. I'm about to run over it. But just to give you an idea of what sort of costs are, if you want to know from a idea. On a standard 80,000 word manuscript and a standard book size, if you were taking, say, 300 copies, the print cost would be about 800 quid for non-illustrated books. pre-press would be about £725 for for all of the basic preset press production costs, which are ISBN allocation, book library legal deposit, map to the website setup, bibliographic, data management, typesetting, proof revisions, cover design, all that side of things. If you wanted a copy edit, it would be about £460 plus VAT. If you wanted a proofread, it would be about £390 plus VAT. The timings are about, on the whole, we quote 20 weeks, but for each extra editorial service you take, that can take 3 to 4 weeks, and depend how quickly you send stuff back to us. We can fast track things, and we'll try and knock a third off the production side time and a half off the editorial time, but you'll pay a premium for doing that. That's on a sort of standard book. I actually then realised that actually on a cookery book, probably the word count is considerably less, maybe 20,000 words. And actually, I did find one for a Indian cookbook that we are actually quoting on at the moment, which is a £20,000 word count, but it is a print-ready file with illustrations already embedded. We're talking about £575 for production costs, but obviously the print costs are much, much higher. 1,000 copies, you're talking a basic of just under £1,000. But this person is looking at foil, ribbon, H&T band, sprayed edges, and by the end of it, it's going to be a very, very expensive book to do. Production times, we quote 20 weeks, but on the whole, it tends to work out 4 to 6 months is what it ends up doing. If you want to do sales distribution, you have to go for 6 months, because that's how long sales representation, that's how long the Star Sales Agency take to properly represent your book into the book trade. So there you go, a complete whistle stop, and I've already run over, so there you go.
No idea how concise that was.
There you go.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay.
Oh, you can come back to bits of it afterwards.
There will be time later to talk to these things. Okay.
Well, basically what he said.
Right. We can go.
Archetype Books is very new, and it's just grown out of our design company, which is Archetype Design, which is being based in London until fairly recently, which is now in Oxford, for about 40 years. And we are pretty much focused on the design and the editing and the writing side. That's where our strength is. My wife is a brilliant editor and was the editor on this book. Bill thought we don't really need an editor because his wife is a very well-educated person, but he soon discovered that he did need her. So she and I have worked very closely together on many books for publishers who you would recognise, Thames and Hudson and Fide and people like that, and lots of art catalogues for South Bank Centre, Crowes Council, Arts Council, those sorts of things. And the reason we worked so well together, not because we liked each other, was she thought she knew my job and I thought I knew hers. So there's quite a lot of working and pulling and pushing, and we really came to an understanding that editing is absolutely crucial part of design, and design is a crucial part of editing. The two things are sort of fairly difficult to separate out. So anyone doing self-publishing has to really take this on board if they want to produce something really good. Now, our interest is not necessarily to help you come up with the next Harry Potter or 50 Shades of whatever colour you like. But I really love books. I love the tangible thing of picking them up and the smell when you open that book. And although we do websites and we do all sorts of digital things, which my son Jack here is the expert on, as well as being very modest, there is nothing like the physicality of the book that you have in your hand, which most of you would probably agree. So when you come to think about the design of a book, it's pretty important to be thinking of that design. Good design, I think, shouldn't really be noticed. So bad design is definitely noticed. So you know when you can't get out the car park because the signage is so bad and you're going around in circles, or you have a spoon, and this looks really great, this spoon, it's got this lovely inlay here, and you put it in your porridge and let it go and it tips up and your porridge goes everywhere. You know when design is bad. You don't necessarily notice when it's good, but that's what we are aiming for, is somebody picks up this book and they just think, God, this is an interesting guy. I love his story, and these recipes, the photography, the use of colour, the sensitivity with the paper, the fact we've got 3 ribbons instead of 1, all those things are part of the function of the book. So design and editing is a crucial part of the function to make a really good book. I could go on forever about that, but in time constraints, I'll pass that over for now.
Are you stopping there?
I'm stopping there, as long as you will.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay. Can I borrow your watch, because I haven't got a time thing?
There you go, yeah.
Let me worry about the time. You just talk.
Okay, cool. So, oh no, that's too vibrant.
I'm not sure when you're done.
This is my new cookbook, which Michael has published. Hattie, who's somewhere lurking there, said I should bring along some books to try and sell them. They're really heavy, and I've been lurking them all around London today. So if anybody wants to buy a book, I'd be hugely appreciative.
Straight into the salesman.
Yeah, got to do it. As Richard said, I published 2 vegetarian cookery books with Thorsten's HarperCollins in the 1990s, and this is the first book I've published since then, and it's omnivorous. I've absolutely loved the process of writing and creating this book, and it's been completely different to the process of publishing through Thorsten's. And so I'll come on to sort of some of the differences. Basically, the reason the book happened was that Michael does all the design for my cafes, and he does the signage and the adverts that we do and the aprons and all that. About once a year for the last sort of probably 10 years, he said, "You should do another cookbook, Bill. We should do a cookbook together." And I was going, "Yeah, of course, yeah." And eventually, it was kind of the dripping thing on the rock, and I thought, yeah, this would be a good thing to do. It'd be a fun thing to do, and I felt that enough time had gone by that I had something new to say. Partly that there's a lot of meat in here, and the other 2 books were vegetarian. So, for all sorts of reasons, it felt like the right time to do it. And just before I go on to kind of what I feel I've learnt from self-publishing and crowdfunding, I thought it might be helpful just to do a quick timeline of how it worked for me working with Michael. And it's probably not very different to what Jonathan said about how it would work with them, but it's probably was for us a slightly more learning as we went process. So back in June of last year, so June 2016, we started having proper conversations, and not long after that I came over for a meeting with you in Oxford, and we started talking about what shape the book might take. I knew pretty much the food I wanted to put into it, but I didn't know what it would look like. I just hadn't thought about many things to do with it. But from that very first date, we had this coming Christmas in mind, because I guess it's a truism, is it, that Christmas is the time to sell books. So that was certainly what we had in mind, what we were aiming for, and we were aiming for October 2017 as the date when it would be published. And everything kind of flowed from that. So July, August, I started drafting an introduction and a potential recipe list, and at the same time I was thinking about how it'd be paid for, how the publishing would be paid for, and began to think about crowdfunding. So from July, August 2016, I was beginning to think about the crowdfunding campaign. So So there was a lot. I guess one of the things I'm saying is there was a long lead in to that campaign, which didn't happen until May 2017. So then September 2016, we started doing some photo shoots with the first photographer, and I'll talk a bit more about that experience as well. January 2017, changed photographer, ditched all the photos that we'd spent 3 months doing once a week in my house a whole day, and started again with Jay Watson, who's been absolutely fantastic for the pictures in this book. Then January to April 2017, the photography sessions again once a week in my house all day during those months, and at the same time planning the Kickstarter campaign. May 2017, 4-week Kickstarter campaign, which raised the money necessary. Didn't raise all the costs to do with bringing the book into existence, but the vast majority. And then by mid-May, I got the text and Jay got the pictures to you. And I think it was July, so that's 6 weeks later, that the final, what do you call it, thing?
Edited manuscript.
Edited manuscript, thank you. Went off to the printers in Hong Kong. And actually that's one of the many areas that I realised I knew nothing about, having been through a conventional publishing experience before. And from quite early on, Michael was getting quotes from, all our food is local, and I thought, well, it'd be nice to use the local printers. Unfortunately, when you come to price it, it would have been twice the price to get a UK printer. There's a very nice printer in Herefordshire that we use for lots of things. So the book's printed in Hong Kong. So yeah, the whole printing of it is a whole other area of ignorance for me. So July 2017, the final proofs went to the printers. Beginning of October, that is, what is that? July, August, September, October. It was kind of 10 to 12 weeks or something between getting the final manuscript to Hong Kong and getting the books delivered. And there were various kind of proof stages, including a wonderful stage called the Ozolids. I'd never heard of Ozolids before, but there's this kind of huge, great thing unfolded, which was an early version of the book. And the book was delivered on time at the beginning of October, and so it's now been in print for a month. So that's the kind of overall time scale. I'd had an agent who'd got me the previous deal with Thorsen's back in the 1990s. She'd retired, so I was faced with a sort of theoretical decision. Should I go out there and try and go through the whole thing again from scratch, get an agent, hawk myself around conventional publishers? I'm not on TV, I don't have 50,000 followers on Instagram. I thought I could spend a lot of time doing that and get nowhere. And at the same time, it was Michael who'd kind of been cajoling me into doing this, so it seemed like a much better idea to do it ourselves together. So my motivation for self-publishing was twofold initially. Firstly, I didn't think I'd get a deal, or not a worthwhile deal, with a conventional publisher. And secondly, I was really clear about what I wanted to say, and I was really clear about the sort of quality of book I wanted to produce. And my experience with Thorsen's, and this may be just my experience, but certainly my experience was it was them telling me how it was going to be. It wasn't me telling them how it was going to be. And from where I am now, I want to be in the position where I'm in control. Sounds wrong, because actually, and I'll come on to this later, it's definitely not a one-person thing, but I'm to some extent in the driving seat as to what shape the book takes. So I didn't think I'd get a conventional publisher, and also I wanted to be in control in some ways. But there's two other things which have kind of become apparent to me through the process. One is money. Now, I think, part of my motivation for doing this in the previous books is there is a kind of creative urge. It's just really nice to do a book, to get it out there, to see it there, for people to come to you and say, that's a really good book. Oh, your book's grubby on our shelves. It's been there for years. We use it. That's all lovely. But also, we all need to make a living. And so with this book, for which we've got we've had 3,000 printed, if I sell all of those 3,000 copies, which the signs are that we will, it will be a very much more profitable exercise than the 2 books together that I published through HarperCollins.
Can you just lay out the numbers so people
Sure.
see the...
So, well, I probably don't have all of them in my head.
Roughly.
Printing costs were about £3 a go, is that right?
Yeah.
Then the other costs are photography, which is a big cost, design and editing. There's quite a lot of PR and marketing costs, and I'll come on to some specific Kickstarter costs as well, because crowdfunding has its own costs associated with it. So I guess that all adds up to costs to get the book in existence and with a certain element of marketing and PR of somewhere between 20 and 30,000 quid. So the printing is a relatively small proportion of that. The book's selling at, so I'd say this total cost probably 20 quid, nearer to 20 quid. The book's selling for 20 quid. If I sell 3,000 copies, that adds up to 60,000 quid. So my advance from HarperCollins for each book was 6,000 or 7,000 quid. The royalties were pitiful.
Yeah.
So
And someone doing the same thing now would get a much smaller advance.
really,
Yeah.
okay, right.
Yeah, and it's
Right?
also
Is that
worth
right, Tom?
also worth pointing out that the royalties, you have to. It's an advance on royalties, so you have
Yeah.
to earn out the
Yeah.
advance
Yeah.
before.
Well, I
you
think that's
actually
why
get
they
any-
were so
yeah.
pitiful,
Yeah.
because we got a little way into royalties, but not very far. So, I may not sell all 3,000, but I think I will, because I've got 2 cafes, so they will just keep selling. But I'm still selling my books from published in the 1990s, so they just keep trickling along. So, money is a potential reason, but you've got to be realistic about what in your particular situation you're going to sell. But the other thing is, I've had a really. Is there anybody from HarperCollins here tonight?
I used to work there.
You used to work there. Okay. So when I started talking about this book, a guy who I used to deal with at HarperCollins, who's moved on to another smaller publisher, said, I really liked your books. And actually, somebody else in my office really liked your 2 old veggie cookbooks. We'd love to repackage them and do something with them. So just check out your contract with HarperCollins and make sure that's okay, because HarperCollins have shown no interest in them for years. Well, the answer is no. They've got the copyright. And the deal was that so long as they put copies on the shelf 6 months from when I requested them, I was stuffed. I couldn't do anything with it. This seems to me utterly wrong, but probably I was just naive in the way I signed up to the contract.
No, that's very standard.
So that's very standard.
Yeah.
So that seems to me very standard and very wrong, and I would be deeply unwilling to commit to such an arrangement ever again.
Did you sign up for global rights?
I haven't a clue. I signed whatever was
did,
put in front of me.
No, you would have done.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Did you read our contract?
He's having your first ball.
oh dear. But so that I have to say that was an interesting moment, and that made me think. Actually, I'm doubly glad to be in charge of this. This is my book, and I'm now in charge of it. So Richard asked me to say, was I sensible, and did I look at other self-publishing options? The answer is not really, because Michael's a mate, and we just had a good relationship, and I knew it was going to be a good way of doing it. What I did look at a little bit was other versions of crowdfunding apart from Kickstarter, because it became sort of clear to me that I didn't want to go to the bank and borrow 10, 15, 20,000 quid to do this. That would feel quite nerve-wracking. But crowdfunding is brilliant for this. Crowdfunding to me is made for publishing, because you do all the work in advance with publishing and you get the money later on. Well, that in terms of, you know, paying the rent and buying your kids baked beans, that's a kind of mismatch. So with crowdfunding, you're getting paid an initial amount roughly at the same time as you're doing all the work. At least that's how it worked for me. And then you've kind of covered your initial, hopefully you've covered the bulk of your initial costs with the crowdfunding campaign. And then it becomes a business after that. So then you've got to obviously sell it and get beyond just paying for your costs. So, okay, so that all happened, the book's here. So now there is a published book. It's only been out for a month, sales are looking promising so far, but you know, largely through my own networks, through the 2 cafes and other kind of networks I'm a part of, and locally in Herefordshire. Locally, by the way, it's brilliant. God, I mean, people love a local book. So the other thing Richard said was talk about what the things I've learned from the experience so far. So I've got a list of 7 things here I've learned. And the first thing was a real pleasure, but an unexpected pleasure, was that, you know, you kind of think of writing a book as a solitary activity. This was definitely a team process. Our team was me, Michael, Jack over there, Marianne, who was the editor, Jay Watson, who was the photographer, and also really importantly, but the last person to join the team, Dominic Harbour, who's been doing the PR and marketing. That's made it so much more of a pleasure working as part of a team. I never felt when I was publishing with a conventional publisher that I was part of a team. There was a dialogue, and I got on really quite well with my editor, but it was pretty much them telling me how it was going to be, rather than the kind of collegiate, let's work it out together how the best way to do it is. So the team thing is the first thing. And secondly, make sure you've got the right team members. I mentioned about this photographer and I sacked the photographer after 3 months. Every week he came, he took pictures, I'd email them off to Michael. We'd look at them and we'd have this discussion. We went, yeah, I think there's some we can use there. And then we'd kind of have another discussion a day later going, they're not great, are they? I mean, you know, we did the correct thing, we gave feedback. It wasn't working, and he's somebody I've worked with before. He's done great pictures for us of the cafes and stuff, but it was not working. As a food photographer, he wasn't working. So it was a huge thing. I hated doing it. I hated sacking him. But it has ended up being absolutely the right decision. So the thing number 2 I'd say is, if you get the feeling that there's a part of your team that's wrong, don't just kind of live with that awkward feeling. Do something about it. Thirdly, crowdfunding. That's really, I mean, we could have a whole other evening about crowdfunding. But I think
it goes back about 200 years.
Okay, it goes back about 200 years, so we'll hear about that. But I mean, for me, it was a very positive experience, but it's a lot of work. It is not a kind of, oh yeah, I'll stick it on Kickstarter and it will get the money rolling in. It really is not. So that, in a sense, you've got 2 projects on. You haven't just got your book to produce and publish. You've got a crowdfunding campaign to run, and then you've got your book to produce and publish. And probably, certainly in my case, we were doing those 2 things in parallel. So there is a lot to do, and you just need to kind of take that on board. Secondly, secondly, on crowdfunding, make sure you've allowed for all the costs of a crowdfunding campaign in your plan. I mean, if you're self-publishing, it's a business. You've got to do a business plan. And so the costs, for instance, on Kickstarter, if you look at all the successful cookbooks, they've all got quite swanky videos. So you've got to get somebody who can produce a proper video. It will say on Kickstarter, just do it. You can just do it with an iPhone in your kitchen, it'll be fine. Not for the ones that are successful, if they've had a proper person who knows what they're doing. And then, that's the job. I mean, maybe this is different in London, but in Herefordshire we're a little bit behind the times. Getting people to understand what crowdfunding is actually a whole communications issue of itself. So for this kind of crowdfunding, for Kickstarter sort of crowdfunding, that it is not charitable giving. I'm not in the gutter, and I'm not asking you to kind of, mend my broken leg or whatever. nor am I asking you to invest in my business. I'm pre-selling the book. That's what I'm doing. I'm also you come up with all sorts of other exciting things. I've sold dinners for 20 at my house. We've had cafe experience days and all kinds of things. But basically, it's about pre-selling the book. So getting people to understand that that's how it works was quite a thing. But a huge plus of the crowdfunding process is that for me, it's really strengthened links with a kind of broader community that I didn't really know I was a part of. But it starts with our email list for the cafe in Hereford, our email list for the cafe in Cambridge, and then friends and family. You've got to bring in friends and family for this kind of thing, and tell them all about it. The really lovely thing is that a lot of people who backed the Kickstarter campaign, it's not the same as just going to a shop and buying a book. They feel part of it. That's certainly how they've reacted with me. And you've got to do the updates on Kickstarter or whatever funding platform you're on, and tell people what you're up to, send them pictures of you poring over the Ozolives with Michael. And there is a real sense of, again, it's like a bigger team. These are the people that are helping me publish. And that's been it's both rewarding and I think business-wise it's a good thing. And the last thing I'd say is that the additional control of self-publishing, from my point of view, I'd say has been highly worthwhile. I wish I'd brought along my 2 previous cookbooks, and I meant to, which I'm very proud of. But if you compare the design quality of those books with the design quality of this, it is leagues apart, and this is the better one. I mean, when you were talking about trying to make your books comparable, I don't think that's what we should be aiming for. We should be aiming for they should be better than what. And since doing this book, I've become much more aware of design, and design, I'd echo what Michael was saying, is absolutely key. It's not pictures and words and you dump them together. There is a whole other layer to it. I think self-publish, I feel really positive about it. So we've distributed, of the 3,000 print run, we've distributed 500 to the people who backed on Kickstarter. We sold 500 in the first month, but that still leaves 2,000 books sitting in my chicken shed. So, the other thing I'd say is where I'm at, which might sound like the end of the process, really is the beginning of the process. So I would love this book to be around for a long time to come. I would love it to gain wider readership. But that's the point we're at. So that's the whole game to come.
Great. Okay. I'm going to set my timer and then talk massively more than 10 minutes. I have no background in food writing whatsoever. So I've self-published fiction books, both ebooks and paperbacks. And I'm on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast. The podcast is like an on-demand audio show. I've done the good thing that most people do in these situations. I went to the internet and found the 3 most asked questions on self-publishing. So I'm going to try and answer those. The first one is, how does self-publishing work? Now, I would consider what these guys doing is what I would call assisted self-publishing. So they are a company that provides services to people to self-publish. What I did is I managed the whole process myself. So it's kind of the equivalent, like if you're getting your kitchen done, you can either get the carpenters in, you can get the gas people in, or you can hire a project manager, which is what these guys will be doing. So these guys are managing the project for you. And obviously with a book like this, that's an extremely good idea to do, because you've got things like photography and design that you could find the designer yourself, but it's a lot easier if you know somebody who's already knows where to go. And the same with print as well. The advantage, of course, is if you do it yourself and you're totally in control of which services you use. And there are quite a few marketplaces out there. There's one called readsy.com, where they have various people who have been editors at publishing companies, cover designers. My experience, of course, is with text-based books mainly, so there's no pictures in them. It's possible to self-publish fairly simple books with pictures in what's called print on demand. So you've obviously not gone down the print on demand route. What print on demand is where you upload, say, a Word file or a PDF file to a site like CreateSpace, who are part of Amazon, and when somebody orders your book on Amazon, it will send a little electronic signal to Amazon's computers, and then it will print out one copy of the book and send it off to the customer. So the advantage of that, of course, is that you don't have to have 20,000 books in your chicken shed. The disadvantage to it is it's probably about twice as much per book to print as, I mean, it depends on what manufacturer you're using, but certainly if you go to somewhere in Hong Kong, it's going to be a lot cheaper per book, but you don't have to keep the stock. So for most people in the fiction world and for simple text-based non-fiction books, print on demand is often the way to go for print books. Now, the next question that I saw was, can self-publishing be profitable? And the answer is, of course, it depends. In terms of where the money is in self-publishing, and I'm not sure how applicable this is to food writers, the most money you can make in books is in e-books. So for a typical book that you sell on Amazon as an e-book, you can earn up to 70% of the royalties yourself for each e-book you sell. If you compare that to even selling a paperback book on Amazon, they take out the printing cost and then you get 40% of what is left. So you can see that actually you're probably going to be earning 3 or 4 times as much money from an e-book as you would from a paperback book on Amazon. If you then have to go to a bookstore, it gets even worse. And this is where, if you're extremely keen to get your book into bookstores, use one of these guys, especially this guy over here, because the reason I say that is that there are services like Ingram Spark where they will let you print on demand a book and have it available to be ordered by bookstores on the Ingram. So Ingram are the biggest distribution company in the world, and they've got this Ingram Spark. But a typical bookstore will take 55% of the cost of the book straight away. Then you've got to pay the cost of printing the book, and if the bookstore doesn't sell it, they can return it to you a lot of the time, and you lose the money from that. And then just because it's able to be ordered in bookstores doesn't mean they're going to order it. You need a team, either yourself or somebody else, to go round to the bookstores and try and sell it to them. And that's where having a service like that, if you're keen to get into bookstores, then you should probably use an assisted publishing service. But from a money-making point of view, ebooks and Amazon are the best place to make money. So it's kind of, profitability is better in terms of being available online or being available as an ebook. So when you write to me. Right, the last question I had, which I've just already covered, but I'll cover again, which is, can you self-publish print books and get them into bookstores? And the answer is yes, of course you can, but the big publishing companies still have an advantage in bookstores because of economies of scale. So they have teams that go around, go into bookstore chains, getting people to order it, and that's where you get the long lead times. If you compare it to Amazon, you can do most of the stuff yourself. You can upload a book to Amazon, and that process is not particularly difficult. It doesn't actually cost anything to upload a paperback book to Amazon or to create an ebook. All those services are available. And it's not just Amazon as well. There's several other ebook companies. There's one called Kobo, which have got global distribution as an ebook company. They're based in Canada. And again, you're getting like 70% royalties from that. Now, I don't know enough about the world of food writing to know if it's all pictures and exciting food, or if you guys are writing text-based books. But for text-based books, you might want to consider ebooks and just having it as an Amazon book. The last thing, the last thing I said is actually the biggest question, which is what I've done the most interviews about, which is how do you market books? Now, the traditional way of doing book marketing is with things like book publicists. That's very PR based. Now, a lot of people are starting to use social media marketing and also social media advertising. The problem you get a lot of the time with social media advertising is that because you've got such low margins on books, it's very difficult to actually spend less on advertising than you would from what you get from what you earn. What I recommend to people, and again, this is how applicable this is to food writing, but if you put your book onto Amazon, Amazon can sell the book for you. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's say that you get your book into, I don't know what the food categories are, I should have looked them up on Amazon, but let's say there's a vegetarian cooking category. If you get your book into the vegetarian cooking category chart on Amazon, people will start to see that book. And then it also, if you've ever used Amazon, you'll see that it's also this also books at the bottom. So people who bought this book also bought that book. So Amazon itself can be a selling engine. So there is an argument for spending money on advertising, even at a loss, to try and get yourself into a chart on Amazon. There's all sorts of techniques that people have used in terms of the various email services, the biggest of which is called BookBob, where people sign up for weekly emails with recommendations of books, and that's what a lot of self-publishers are using. I don't know how big their section is on food writing, so it may not be applicable. But I've done so many shows on marketing. These rather scrappy notes I've actually created as a blog post. So if you go to beginselfpublishing.com/guild, you can download my rather long-winded notes, which I'm just skimming over here. There's just lots of links to relevant shows about things. So that's just, I finished a minute early. I haven't covered half the stuff I've put down.
Sing a song or a tap dance?
You didn't play me for that. So.
Richard, could I just come back, because there was one other thing you asked me to do, which I didn't at all do in my talk, was to actually look at the differences and the perceptions of self-publishing and mainstream publishing. And having worked in both, I can say with some authority now, the old way of seeing self-publishing as vanity publishing and such like has completely disappeared. When I moved over from mainstream publishing to self-publishing, I was kind of interested in how my old colleagues in the mainstream world would look at me as having taken on this side. And I wondered whether they would show me disdain and sort of having gone over to the dark side and things like that. But no, they were all absolutely fascinated about what the mechanics were. And actually, one of the other things you will see now is that a lot of the mainstream publishers are opening up secret portals to try and get self-publishing into there. And you will find that actually the publishing houses do have a self-publishing portal that they will be actually offering these same kind of services that Troubadour are doing. They're just not telling you. And some are getting in and out of it and things like that. But everyone has seen the 50 Shades of Grey, all of that. And that's, I mean, the most obvious one, but all of the amazing successes that self-published books have had in the management and business and all these kind of areas and kind of things, and they've realised what an incredible money spinner it can be when it is right and the people who are doing it. And basically the mainstream publishers want a bit of that action themselves, so they are, in their own quiet way and sometimes quite secret way, they are trying to get into this business in a way that they're not telling you really about very much. And nobody is looking at it in the old days of vanity publishing. It is now seen as a very serious way of making lots of money, and you know, Troubadour makes lots of money. I mean, it is a big business. It is a multi-million pound turnover company from what we do in the self-publishing world, and we're just one of quite a few other people who are working in this particular area. So, anyway, very potted onto that one as well.
Okay. Before we begin the Q&A proper, there's someone here who has another story to tell, his own story. Jason Goodwin?
Hi, yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. Story.
Yeah. Just give your briefly your experience.
Okay, very briefly. I I've been a published writer all my life, so I've been sort of handing in my essays, at the end of the year, and then they publish it. So I wrote history books, and eventually started to write detective stories based in the area. So basically, I write about a detective in Istanbul in the 1840s, and it's an area which that's my special knowledge. It's the only thing I know anything about. So when it came to writing detective stories, that's where I set them. But I made my detective a eunuch. That's a whole other story. But it meant that rather than to have sex, he did a lot of cooking because he needed something to do in the evenings. And then people said to me, "Well, we like the." In fact, I began to think that people were reading these books for the cooking, not for the, not to find out who'd done it. And they were very successful. They went around the world, and that's been great. But when I went to, a lot of people said, "Well, we like the food," and I'd done a few demos, and because it was fun to do, because this is about having fun, really, or rather, it's trying to. I suppose it's also trying to make a little bit of something out of something you enjoy doing. And people said, "Well, cook, do a cookbook." So eventually I went to Faber, who published my books, and said, "What about a cookbook?" And they said, "Forget it. You must be kidding. You're not on television." Same story. So you're not on TV, so you can't possibly have a cookbook. Okay. I thought, well, okay. Sod you. Yeah, okay, I'm not on television, but I think I'm going to do this anyway. And I looked into it, and the way I went into it was to think that I will self-publish, but it'd be really good if I could. I set up a publishing company, and I think the difference between just self-published, and a publishing company is that if you're a publishing company, you have a different name, and also you have some distribution, and in order to get distribution. Distribution basically means that if somebody in Scunthorpe wants your book, they can go to the bookshop and they can press the button and it comes next day. Because as you're all saying, you're in the trade, you're selling into the book trade. And so we started this book, and we found some sort of idiotic company that's prepared to take on the books and be our distributor at a cost, obviously, and that cost is something like 25% of the cost of the book. And they would also provide reps in the same thing who would also sell the book out there, and that is a further 10%. So you give away the stuff to the distributor, but then after that, they're in charge of getting the book out. And so basically, my son and I, so it's father and son operations, also quite good, and he could handle the same sort of things as Jack, is it? Yeah, same sort of stuff, the technical stuff and the thing. And we said, and then we had to produce this cookbook. And so I spent 2 days online watching a lot of tutorials about food photography. I kind of, okay, that's brilliant. Online is brilliant. I found out how to do it. And I'll tell you, I hate to say this, but how you do it is you get something called a pancake lens, and you choose northern light. And with those two things, you can't really go so terribly wrong.
Your original photographer, wasn't it?
So I cooked the food, I cooked the photographs. The only difference between that and doing it professionally was that I had, like 4 hungry children going, "Can you get on with the photographs? I want to eat the food." Because I was cooking the stuff as you were going to eat it, and then I was photographing in between times. But it worked, and I can show you the book. You can decide for yourself whether we should have got fired in the first 3 months or not. Some of the pictures are better than others. But then you shoot in RAW. You can do a lot of stuff afterwards. The design. My son was in charge of design. He wanted to do design. He was interested in that, so he designed the book. Coming out with the recipes, I put the recipes out online. I didn't put them out online. I put an appeal out to readers of my. You see, this is about networks, and what Bill says is really interesting. He's running these cafes, it's about having other people involved. And in my case, I got basically you have to test food before you write it's got to be tested. Well, that could be a big expense, paying someone basically to die on your behalf, and it could get run into millions. So what I did was to say to the people who follow what pitifully would be known as my blog, who'd like to try a recipe, and because the books have been translated into loads of languages and stuff. I got people from Alabama and people from Albania and people from Peshawar, and people saying, "Yeah, okay, we'll try a recipe." And so I'd say, "Well, are you vegetarian or not?" That was the only thing I said. And if you're not, then try this one, or if you are, you try this one. And they,
Where did the recipes come from?
well, out of my head.
Right.
Yeah, and you know how recipes come to you. I mean, recipes. I mean, from travels and from reading and from all that. So recipes not very difficult. I mean, you can get recipes to go. Ish. And it is, of course, that is difficult. And in this case, one of the things I wanted to do with this book was to make it a bit of a connect it with the crime stories. So what we did was to put in like a page of an extract from the books, where the Tartar assassin in Venice in the 1840s leaps on our hero, and they tussle and fall out of the window into the Grand Canal. Good moment. And then its opposite that is the assassin's steak tartare. Well, why not? You know, that's the inevitable thing. So that will work well. Photographs, and also not just our photographs of the food, but also really nice things from Ottoman times. So because there's so much art stuff there, which doesn't appear in a boring old Faber book, which you're not allowed to have pictures in novels nowadays. I mean, in the old days, you know, Bulldog Drummond did something. That'd be a sort of picture, but not anymore. So I was able to illustrate it with other stuff, you know, kind of beautiful artworks and so whatever it was available. And so that's how and then these guys tested the recipes. They all wrote really useful comments. I mean, I had about 120 people who were testing them and made really sensible remarks. So that's really interesting. Use people if they're prepared to do it, because it's fun and they enjoy it. And they taught me so many things I hadn't realised. One of them turned out to be she turned out to be a cookbook editor in the States who'd just done a book with the wife of the Turkish ambassador. So that was helpful. And it's that kind of thing. So there's a sort of serendipity about the whole thing. You cast your bread upon the waters and see what comes back. And in the end, we printed the book, we did the whole thing, we went to China too. The Italians were 3 times the price, the Brits were twice the price. The things were cheap, but it's a slow process because they've got to ship the books back. We got distribution in the States. Somebody else had read it, was the security correspondent for NPR, which is a big American radio station. She liked the detective story, so she did an interview with me about the cookbook because that seemed like a good story, so that really helped in the state. You know, it's that kind of thing. So that's all we've done. And we printed 3,000 and they went straight away. We then printed quite a lot more and they haven't really gone. So it's like, boom. Now I know the one, and I've been told this by all publishers, they say that's publishing is about getting the reprint right. Okay? That's it. So it's simple. Pancake lens, Northern Light, and get the reprint right. And then you're home dry.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay.
Good
And actually,
detective stories.
I just echo that thing about testers, which I got a bunch of people testing recipes, and it was absolutely brilliant. And then the practical comments that they came back with were superb. And it was another thing, as you say, about developing that community.
And they're your first buyers.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
in my case, I'm interested in your Kickstarter thing. I looked at it, I thought it was just too. I thought that was too difficult. I thought it was too difficult to go onto Kickstarter. The possibility of total humiliation was too vast. So many people didn't make the money.
Unsold books, though, would you? That's the thing.
Well, I would, because I'd still have thought, whoa, we're really on a roll here. Let's have another thing.
More.
Yeah, more, perhaps more. You know, I mean, you learn. The Kickstarter thing is really interesting, and I suppose in a way, talking to my readers was that was like a Kickstarter community. I think I should have probably done Kickstarter because, and I'll tell you why, because of course all that social media stuff is not really the person who sees it first, it's who they then go on and tell. And if they were to say, oh great, you know, there's this guy, I read his books, he's trying to get this money together on Kickstarter, and you can link to it here, they would have sent it to 10, you know, that's how that might have worked, and we might have done better that way. I don't know, I mean, who knows. But it's interesting that you did that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Does anyone have any questions? Has anyone here ever considered self-publishing? Raise hands. Yeah.
So the difference basically is, in self-publishing, you pay and you get the profits. That's the bottom line, isn't it? Yeah.
You get more money back.
Yeah.
So
you take the risk
if
instead of
you're
the publisher
successful,
taking
you
the
get
risk.
more money.
Yeah.
If you're not successful, you've wasted
So you
more
take the risk instead of the publisher.
Yeah.
You control
And also you do the work, but also you can control it. And I think that's quite important.
But you lose out on the big difference I've found on trying to sell the books is the publisher will have a list.
And
They all work together,
Yeah.
they will choose bits, they will do deals, they'll be able to put things together as promotions, they work looking for the easy wins, they do all this kind of thing. When you're working with trying to do the same thing with self-publishing, you can't do that because all of you own all your own books. So every time I'm trying to put together a deal with a retailer, I'd have to come back to every person involved with it and say, well, if your book's there, would you be willing to do an extra 10%? And it makes it much more difficult. And that's how the mainstream publishers, can do a lot of more.
And that's how they sort of control this.
Yeah.
So, Bill, are your books in bookshops?
They're not yet. I mean, as I say, we're only a month into having.
Yeah.
I was really interested to hear your 6-month lead-in, because that, I have to say, is a bit of learning for us that we didn't do any of that. So we're talking to the region around Hereford, and we'll probably do the same around Cambridge. Whether that'll be successful or not, I don't know. But the sales so far are mostly through the cafes, through the Kickstarter network, and through our other networks. So for us, I guess there'll be a point at which either somebody will pick it up nationally, and they'll do a piece somewhere saying this is a great book. And the previous books have been written up in national papers and things, so might happen, might not happen, and we're trying to make it happen. But probably that's the bit that I think we've not really got covered is bookshops. And I'd say for the model that we've followed, you've got to assume that very few of your sales will come. The bookshops would be a bonus if we sell through bookshops. So we've got to have in mind other ways of selling. Our own web shop is selling a steady trickle. The cafes will sell, and then it's really easy to get into a fairly wide area, again in our local areas, which is Herefordshire and Cambridgeshire. And people are very keen to support it, so all the farm shops or the delis or even other cafes are selling.
What about events? I mean, setting up
and
events.
that's a whole other area, and that I'm just getting into now. I've done a couple and we'll do more.
Yeah.
And that's all quite hard work,
Yeah.
doing all those things. It would be lovely to get an order for 20,000 from Waterstones.
Why start at 20?
Just call your mate a Waterstones.
Every other day I'm getting one of those coming in. Going, 20, 40, whatever.
But for us, I think it's going to be a matter of finding a myriad of different niches, and the food festivals will be one of them, local shops will be another, our cafes will be a big one, and our own kind of social media stuff.
Is it on Amazon?
It is, but deeply ineffectively. I don't use Amazon myself, so that's been another kind of learning.
They know
thing.
that.
They probably do.
But that thing that Tim was saying was about, how when you buy one book on Amazon, then it says somebody wrote this book that. So it's like
I'm sure we have to. It's somewhere something else we have to work at. There's about 20 different areas that we're currently working on trying to get the book out there, and each one takes a bit of time. So we'll see.
I mean, the other thing to consider here is that you don't have to just self-publish, because publishing rights are just, you've got ebook rights, you've got audiobook rights, you've got print rights, and each territory has a different right. So Bill could sell the rights to his book to an Australian publisher and say, you take the book and you distribute it in Australia, because we're not going to do it. So that's why, if you do get a traditional publishing contract, make sure you read the contract and run through what rights you're signing away. English language, global, all formats, you've got nothing. But if you just sell US rights, then you can potentially self-publish a book as an ebook elsewhere, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but that's where you won't get that at a mainstream publisher. There's no mainstream publisher who will allow you to keep your rights in different parts of the world or whatever, and then do that because they're investing in that.
That's what. They did it with a few self-publishers, and then they strangely enough stopped. Then they kept the ebook rights.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that we're not talking about self-publishing trying to emulate mainstream publishing, but for the people who couldn't get into mainstream publishing. It's it's a bit more akin to my mind, thinking of microbreweries, for example. If you want to produce a really beautiful book that's only going to sell to 50 people, then see if there's a finance model that will make that happen. And there are many different ways, as Kickstarter is only one of them, to make that come about. So, that's what we're interested in, is looking at every single job. When we started this project with Bill, we weren't thinking of how are we going to get into Waterstones? We were just thinking, is there a model here that works? Because Bill's already got distribution in certain ways in his site, and then we just work out the whole sort of finances of it. What's he got to pay ahead? What comes from the Kickstarter, etc., etc. So, every book now can be thought of very differently. So that's what we're interested in.
How often do you handle really niche books at Troubadour?
Well, actually, quite often, because there are quite a few people who come in and don't want any marketing because they are pretty much selling to a market that they are publishing for. We get inspirational speakers and people like that who just want a book because they're out there doing events and they know, and they are the ones probably who are making the most success out of it, is because they're doing 2,000 or 3,000 a time because they're filling 500-seater, 1,000-seater places, and then they at the end of it have done this incredible spiel and they sell the book and they do it, and they didn't want any marketing services. We do another which is tied into a famous racehorse, which I can't really mention, but they publish because they're selling to. It's a famous trainer of racehorse, and they're selling to that market, and they don't want to sell it in the book trade because they don't want to give away the margins, so they just sell at their own website to all the people who come to their website and want to sell this series of books, and they do it. And there's a whole load of those kind of things. I see less of them, except for in the sales, and kind of reading a weep of how many copies they are taking. But there are quite a few who do that, and that's the thing about Troubadour. You can just choose the bits they want. They just wanted the typesetting and the re-editing and proofreading and all those kind of things for that. They didn't want anything to do with the marketing or sales or the distribution.
So could Bill talk to you afterwards about getting on that?
Well, we were just talking about that before. We used to do a way that we would actually take other people's books and offer services for that book. The trouble is with the whole ISBN prefix kind of thing is that when you're actually trying to do sales and distribution for a company, if all your sales and distribution are not set up with the right the same distribution margins and everything with the right customers, all those kind of things, it gets very, very complicated. And it actually came to a head over a book about bras, actually. We did a book with the lady who runs Rigby and Peller, and she sold a huge amount of books, but she really wanted to do it in one way, and it was quite successful, but it caused a huge amount of problems because there was all different ways of people trying to buy this book, thinking they could get different setup to what we had set up with all the rest of the trade. And so now we very much do it that you need to take a Matador ISBN because everyone knows the metadata behind that, they know what's happening. We haven't really tried it. We're trying to do a new edition of a book that's already out there and give it one of our own ISBNs, which I suppose technically kind of do, but you'd have to do a special trade edition of it or something like that.
They should have talked to you 6 months ago.
Yeah, it's a route. Yes, except for the fact that Bill had a very good way of doing it, which he didn't need quite a lot of what we were doing, and went in another way. So you don't have to do it. If you're doing the more traditional, you kind of see that the end result you want is a duplication of the publishing process as you understood it from your previous experience with paper and paperback, then you probably do need a company like ourselves who can replicate that quite effectively and have all of the relationships already in place to do that and can do it. And of course, part of everything what we're all saying is that even if you're not quite sure how well you're going to sell your books in the book trade or whatever, if you don't get some kind of publicity for your books, it will just disappear without trace. Now, either you can do that through your own ways and having your own contacts and your own way of doing it, but if you need to do a marketing and publicity campaign, you either need to take on and there are people and companies out there who will do you a bespoke marketing campaign individually for yours, but you're paying several £1,000s for it, or you can take it as part of our services and you can pay a couple of £100 for what we're doing, which is creating a press release and getting it out there for you to a media database of journalists and people who might well be interested in it.
It's I was going to add. It's a very that part is a very slow, difficult. That's really the hard part. I thought. In a funny way, writing the book's easy compared to trying to kind of get the marketing and the publicity thing, because it's amazing how long that takes. You write a list of all the people you know who are in the major and who've reviewed your books before and everything, and it's a bit sort of, you really want to just hand that list to somebody else and say get on with it.
But at least you also know those people already. Maybe
then again,
haven't had that luxury of already knowing. And
Yeah.
you don't know the email addresses of all the people. You don't know who you've done. Well, we subscribe to a very expensive marketing database, which means that we have access to every journalist in the
It's
country.
quite a good website though, which gives you a good way of trying to find out what people's email addresses might be. So use that one.
There's also this thing called Twitter, which is quite good.
There's a question.
Can you tell me what you do with print runs? Do you decide print runs, or do
No,
you
we
have
will
conversations?
we will quote to you on a number of different print runs. I mean, basically at the stage when you're setting up the contract, we will give you some options of how much a print run, and if you take those numbers, what your print quote will be at those numbers. So when I was giving that one for that Indian cookbook, we did a quotation on that one on 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 and 4,000 copies. That's quite a lot more than actually we do on quite a few of it, because it was a very highly illustrated, you couldn't make it work on lesser numbers than that. But you actually only need a print run if you're doing a non-illustrated textbook of a couple of hundred copies, which you can. 300 is what we normally quote if you want to get into the book trade, because by the time we put copies into our distributor, into the wholesalers, kept some copies back for Amazon, you need a number of books in all those areas, and your print run will just disappear in that without actually having necessarily sold any to the customer at that point.
And then how do you do reprints?
Well, as we are running out, we'll come back to you and say, do you want to do a reprint, and quote you again. I mean, this is the whole problem, and this is the whole thing, is that it's on that reprint you'll make the money, because you hopefully have at least swallowed up most of the production costs on the first one. Very few people can actually make a profit on that first one. So, I mean, quite often they're just covering their printing costs on that, with little of your initial startup costs. But if you can keep reprints happening, well then obviously you're starting to get more and more money coming your way. But you've got to decide then, what is the right number, because it is, all publishers do exactly the same as you've done, and do a reprint too many and wipe out the entire profit they made of their first one.
Most print doesn't come cheaper than the first print.
Yeah, and most famously, Dorling Kindersley killed a publishing house by over reprinting Star Wars. Yeah, and because they pressed a reprint button before they actually sold they even started selling the first one.
This is the advantage of print on demand.
Yes.
Now the trouble is, this is where I wish I bought one of my print on demand books, because the quality's not quite as good, but it's not, certainly for paperback, it's reasonable in general. The other advantage for print on demand is that because Amazon have got their own print on demand company, the book will never be out of stock. When if you have got a print run and you run out, you'll see that dreadful out of stock option.
Yeah.
So what a lot of self-publishers do is they have a create space version for Amazon, and then they'll use a printing service for the other distribution channels like bookstores.
And what we do is that we will print for the UK market, but we'll do print on demand through Lightning Source for foreign markets where there are people coming. And actually, when you come to the end of your print run, you can choose to not do a reprint. You can actually choose then switch over to print on demand for future books if you think that really it works if you think that the demand is going to go down to just a few copies and you want to keep it in print, but you're not, because if you can get the reprint right, as I say, that's where you make the money. So we'll come back to you, but it is a very difficult thing to judge. We had a book that we did recently where actually they did their own publicity. They wanted to do it themselves rather than ourselves. They got some fantastic publicity, but they ran it too early, because we always run our media publicity when the book is. So they got a whole load of interest in the book. When it first came out, Amazon was reacting to that, ordering huge amounts of copies because they think we've got to get this book, we've got to get it in large numbers. But then the sales died, and they actually very quickly were running out of stock and did a reprint way early, and we were saying, keep it down, don't overdo it. They thought, no, we want to go big on it, and the demand has suddenly dropped off quite a lot, and they've got quite a few years of stock at the moment, unless they can get it all going again, which they might well be able to do, but kind of the story's already been done, so it's going to be difficult to do again.
There are a lot of stories in publishing history of exactly that kind. Reprints. Yes.
You gave out a lot of figures early on, 800 for this and this and this. How much do you, I know it's a big question, but if somebody comes to you with a book, what sort of figure is in mind of, from start to finish, the whole lot?
There is. It's like, how many copies are you going to sell? Because of the, you need couple of thousand to get it going. You probably need, I mean, we'll take 400 as a deposit, which is against, you're talking about, but then, you know, how much are you getting us to do? If you're getting a proofread, it's another 400.
Of service.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it,
houses.
and if you can do a lot of it yourself, then you can keep the cost down. I mean, on our website, we give the price of absolutely everything that we do. It's a set price. We're not quoting you saying, well, for you, we'll do it at such and such. For a starter marketing campaign, we charge 400 quid. For an enhanced marketing campaign, we charge 850 quid. You know, they're all listed down there, and you can choose the ones. But what we'll quote you on is the print costs, because we have to get those from the printers when we have worked out the paper quality. You want the size of the book, you know, everything that we then have to get, which we can't do from our at stage one. But yeah, you're not going to get it out of probably less than £1,000 unless you're doing absolutely everything yourself, and you're still going to print it as well.
Very quickly on the subject of paper qualities, that's something that publishers know all about, but writers might not. Can you briefly explain, give the level, get a sense of the level, the rate?
Well, and I mean, again, it is almost impossible to do, because I mean, if you are doing highly illustrated and you've got to have a sufficient quality that it won't show through on the other side, whoops, of the book, and so you've got to take a GSM which will work. It really then just depends, the coatings and everything. It's how long is a piece of string. I mean, we will give you again on an I mean, you know, on a general quote, which we're doing on a non-illustrated book on this was 216 by 138 demi, 152 black and white text on 80 GSM book wove paper for 100 copies, which the smallest we're quoting £708 for printing. On 500 copies it was 2,216, so it's down to £4 something a copy. But you know, the higher you go, the better the quote will be, but you've got to take the GSM, whereas on our Indian cookbook, which was 254 by 203, 296 pages, colour text on 130 GSM Arctic matte paper, for 1,000 copies we were quoting £9,000, so that's £9 a copy
Printing.
for printing before any of the foil and ribbon and everything. But this is done on I mean, they wanted bells and whistles and everything on this kind of thing. And you know, once it goes down to, we're getting up to 4,000 copies, it's only £16,000 for that. So I mean, you're getting real economies of scale by going for, but you've got to take 4,000 copies as opposed to 1,000 copies. If you're just doing 1,000 copies of that kind of book, it's astronomical to print, and we couldn't even quote on less than 1,000 copies because it was going to cost too much. So you want to be able to do 4,000 or 5,000 copies in order to get, again, you know, down to £4 or £5 a copy of print costs.
There's an argument which says you actually are much better for self-publishing just to go to Amazon and deal exclusively with Amazon, because you're going to get all the benefits in terms of sales and everything else that Amazon give you, and then if you are successful on Amazon, if you sell a lot, you can then go down the secondary route, either to self-publish or indeed even go to a mainstream publisher. I mean,
well, in effect, I think what you're talking about is what's called KTP Select, and that's only true for ebooks. There isn't an exclusive Amazon publishing contract. There are Amazon publishing companies, but they're they generally look at all the Amazon data for ebooks and other sales, and they cherry pick the best people.
But if you do an ebook, you can then do a print-on-demand paperback.
You can do, but the paperback, there's no exclusivity on the paperback, so the ebooks and paperbacks are totally separate. So if you've got an exclusive ebook with Amazon, you can still use a different distributor for paperbacks.
Yeah.
So it's
but
not.
On the other hand, if you go through Amazon, then you're only paying per book. So initially, if you don't want to invest a lot in it,
Yes, you can do it as ADP direct, just as an ebook like that, and you can do it like that.
You can
but
started.
you can. Yeah, but there's the only advantage you get for exclusivity for Amazon as an ebook is that they pay you slightly better royalties in Japan, India, somewhere else. and they give you access to a couple of promotional opportunities. But that's it. And then you can't sell that ebook on any other ebook retailer store. So you can't go on iBooks, for example, which is Apple's platform. You can't go on Kobo. So a lot of self-publishers start with Amazon because it's just one interface and they can do it. But from a print point of view, you don't gain anything from just doing that.
And you've got to also remember that it's a largely automated process, so the book that you will end up at the end, to a large extent, isn't what you're kind of expecting as an equivalent of your mainstream published book.
Depends on what it is you're looking to do.
Well, exactly. I mean, you know, it is the amount of mistakes you get on Create Space are quite interesting sometimes.
The trouble is it is print on demand, so the printing presses
but
are
actually
going to
the whole editing and copy editing and all those kind of things, it isn't one of them.
Yeah, but that's
we get a lot of people who are very unhappy with it.
You can pay for that yourself.
You can do it separate, and you separate it all out and do it yourself. But again, a lot of people are just literally putting a manuscript up there on Create Space, and that's how they do it.
I should be a self-publishing person saying this. The thing about self-publishing is you get the whole range. You get people who have just read some internet guru's book who uploaded a Word file with they've just typed it out in some random thing and uploaded it as an ebook. And then you've got this kind of quality book, which no publisher will probably ever produce this because it's way more expensive than what their bog standard cookbook will be. They're going to try and keep the cost as low as possible so they can make the money out of it. So Bill's created this quality product here because he could.
Yeah, although interestingly, at a cost of only just over £3 a copy.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think
but
there's a lot of argument to...
A big commercial company, they've got their shareholders to look after, so they will be like, we can get it for £2 a copy, slightly worse, it's going to sell as many copies probably.
Yeah.
So self-publishing is the full spectrum. You can make the products as good or bad as you want to. To be competitive, you should have a decent design and editing package. So, really.
I mean, I think the other thing that's interesting to me, just hearing what Michael said and hearing what you're saying, Jonathan, is that it seems that within the, let's call it the assisted publishing, which sounds like a good name for this kind of end of things, there's also a spectrum there. And you're clearly putting out how many titles a year?
600 we put out last year, plus another 350 ebooks, so best part of 1,000.
So a lot of books a year. The advantage is you've got tons of experience, you've been through the hoops many times. Possibly the disadvantage, or some might say a disadvantage, is that it's more of a kind of process that you've been through many times, not quite so much excitement and this is a new thing and we're a small team together. So for me, one of the great things about working with Michael, and no doubt there are other people like Michael, was that There's no one like Michael. But was this thing of having a team that is a small team working together with a real commitment to producing a great product. And I think, so within this side of things, I'd say there's also a range of different possibilities available.
Yeah, and everything what you pay is what you get. I mean, my wife is a freelance publicist and she works and she just does one campaign for one author at a time. That's all she does, and she charges a lot more for doing that because you just have one person working 2 weeks, 4 weeks of their time entirely on your product, doing everything, and you're obviously using a publicist for yours who's, I don't know how they work in the agency and what they're working with, but this is the difference, and what you pay is what you will get in the way. Nobody can ever say what the result will be, but certainly on the level of they are committed to your project, or the amount of time they can give to your project, or the amount of background that they will bring to whatever they're doing. If you're paying for a bespoke service of an individual working for you a month of their time and on nothing else, you'll pay a lot more, but you will get a much more personalised, and we're doing a lot of other books at the same time, but we're trying to do a very professional job within that.
And one thing I'd like to add actually is that historically is a huge amount of what would be known as vanity presses which are still out there, which do a very poor job value for money wise. So make sure that you ask for references of people who've used the service, and you do your research. Google company and scam. There was a famous one that was owned by Penguin, the Author Solutions company, which I think they've now sold. which was basically just they were constantly selling people marketing packages which were of no value whatsoever. So you do need to be very careful with assisted publishing companies. Matador, of course, I've heard very good things about. So no, but genuinely,
what we sell ourselves on is we're probably the most widely recommended out there. I mean, that's what we and genuinely we survive on authors coming back to us to use us again and again for their product because they like what they do. I mean, that's why Matador has got as big in the market as it has.
And if I could just say, your MD wrote blurb in the writer's yearbook about self-publishing, which I would recommend reading.
There's a question at the back.
Crowdfunding, I was going back to, like, what's the typical, I mean, I would say it was an investment. You were saying it wasn't necessarily investing.
Well, there's 3 different models.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about the typical amount.
Okay, well, the 3 different models are basically charitable crowdfunding, which is about, my daughter's got leukemia and will you help me help her?
Yeah.
There's business crowdfunding, which is will you invest in my business? And there's sort of creative project crowdfunding, which is what I did and what Kickstarter is, which is basically you offer what they call rewards, and in return you get a commitment for money. With Kickstarter in particular, you get nothing unless you reach your target amount. You can go over the target and get more money, but if your target, and my target was 15,000 quid, if we'd reached 14,000, we would have got 0. So it's a little bit nervy, but I quite like that. I liked a bit of the gambling element to it.
If an investor had given you like £5, they said, I'll come in for a third.
Sorry, say that again?
If an investor sort of comes in for a third of the amount...
Well, it's not an investor, because they're not...
I don't know, it's funding. I mean, funding is an investment.
No, they're pre...
Can it not be that?
Well, there is a model of investing in a business. That's a completely separate sort of thing.
But publishing is a business.
Yeah, but they're actually, what they're doing, they're just getting a book at a discounted price by paying for it early.
Or in fact, not at the discounted price.
At the full price, yeah.
Share of the profits.
No.
So, not with this kind of crowdfunding. There probably is a version of crowdfunding which does that. For this kind of crowdfunding, you're offering a series of rewards, of which, in my case, by far the biggest one was pre-ordered copies of the book.
Yeah.
But also other slightly more creative kind of rewards. But that was a big message to get across, because actually people do not understand
Is there lots of people you're reaching out to then?
Yeah, I think we had 350 backers or something. So yeah.
Were they just each buying one book?
The whole mixture. So some were buying one, some were buying 1 or 2 were buying things which didn't have a book attached at all. So we've had people buying cafe experience days where they come and work in the cafe and pay us for the privilege, which is great.
And you're still keeping those people working now.
Yeah, we haven't told them their shift's finished. And
So did people buy 10 books?
yeah, some
or
people
20
bought 10 books. Basically, most of the people, a handful of people bought 10 books, and they were mostly friends and relatives, to be honest. They were people who, that was a kind of almost an altruistic bit of support. But the vast majority of people were people who liked the sound. We had a 24-page taster that you could access on Kickstarter, and so there were people who'd looked at that, thought they liked it, and they wanted to pre-order a copy. 1 copy, 2 copies. 1 or 2 copies were the most popular quantities.
Did you look at Unbound?
That's the publishing, the specific
crowdfunding
publishing. Yeah. I didn't, but I did hear about it. And I just rather got enthused by Kickstarter. They have such interesting, wacky projects on them that I really like the sound of them. They had all kinds of music projects, theatrical projects, tech projects. And a lot of the people who backed my book, of the ones I didn't know, from America, Holland, Hong Kong, China, they're people who've backed a whole selection of interesting projects before. And that also, I quite like finding what other things they'd backed and what other things they were into.
Yeah, that's interesting, because my sister did a Kickstarter project for her film.
Right.
And actually she found it utterly nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Particularly like the day before the deadline.
Oh, yeah.
She was a nervous wreck. It was worse than making the film.
Yeah.
But one of the interesting things is that there's this whole kind of network of people who fund projects.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's great.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
just all these people who've got altruism, and they just
Well,
take
but it's
quid here
not. A
and
lot of
20
it's
quid there,
not. It's
lovely.
not necessarily altruism. They love it. I've backed a couple of projects on
me too,
Kickstarter
yeah,
since
yeah.
I've done it.
So is
It's
there
quite
a
a nice
crossover
feeling, isn't
between
it?
projects? So I mean, if you within Kickstarter, is there a crossover?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, if people come on to Kickstarter to back your project and they actually think, oh,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
People get addicted to it, like sort of eBay and things. Yeah, you start ending up doing all sorts of
They
things.
also have various things, and one of the things that you want to get onto on Kickstarter is a thing, they put a little heart symbol, projects we love, and we got that in the first week of our campaign, and that probably made a real difference to a small number of people, particularly internationally. And I don't think they actually look at the projects at all. I think what they do is see who's got a lot of interest early on, and they decide they love that project because they want to back successful projects.
Well, the other thing is with Kickstarter is that you get a lot of interest early on, and then you get a load of interest right at the end.
Yeah.
And that kind of middle section is the really nerve-wracking.
And it's why they advise you strongly to make it a very short period.
Yes.
I was initially going to do 2 or 3 months. They said a month, which is what we went with in the end. I think if I did it again, I might shorten it again, maybe even to 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's
For the
right,
reason
actually.
that you
My
just
sister did a
described.
month, and we thought that was too long.
Yeah.
Because we thought people were losing interest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you direct people to the Kickstarter campaign?
Oh, you send out emails to everybody you
It's
know.
a real, it's a real job of work that
Yeah.
you have to take really seriously, and you have to put a plan together, and you have to have, 20 different ways of how you're going to
And
reach
did you
people.
do that? You didn't have your publicist or someone doing that
Well, Michael and I worked on it, and Dominic, who does the publicity, we brought him on at that point,
Okay.
so he did some as well. But you've got to have your own community. It's all about working with your own community. If you're starting from being in an attic on your own and you've got no connection with anybody else in the book or food world, you're going to struggle.
Any other questions? Yeah.
To Jonathan, so for your company to say whether you're going to take a book or not, do you want to see the finished article or do you want a proposal?
We want a proposal, and we'll normally ask for some pages of manuscript or something. I mean, well, yeah, you'll first of all talk to our customer services department, and the customer services manager basically spends her time reading pages of the proposals and think, and we're not going to do a major work on it. We're just going to make sure that it reads reasonably well. It's got a decent proposal behind it, and it's something that we, within certain boundaries, can put our name to.
Would you ever recognize potential that needs to be developed and suggest that the author do more work on it?
Yes, I mean it's very difficult to. I mean, we had to in the end just say yes or no to a certain. The ones we're saying no to, yeah, I think Lauren probably some of them she might well say it's almost there, but we still feel that it isn't quite right to us. And sometimes, I mean, we do also have this partnership publishing side to our business, which is different again, and we also will see things coming into us which we're saying, well, actually, we'd quite like to look at this, and we're thinking, actually, we'd like to be more involved, and then we'll say, potentially, look, our people in the Book Guild side would like to talk to you about a more partnership deal, because...
So that's like a halfway between...
Yeah, so, and Book Guild, which was a separate company before, and we bought it and changed it, which, again, started out, had a very good reputation, then got a slightly less good reputation of doing some of the things of talking about it, and when we bought it, we pretty much turned it around, and it seems to be going the right way again now. But that is, partnership, and that's everything from almost at self-publishing level to something where we get some proposals, and they're from celebrities or things like that, who want to do their own publishing, they want to control it themselves, and we'll say, fine, we'll put our money into that because we're thinking it will sell in considerable numbers, and we want to get something out of that ourselves.
Can I just do a quick answer to the funding, because this is an unbound. And I just thought I should just give you a quick rundown, so I'd asked somebody done Unbound and how they work. And so this is Henry Jeffries, shortlisted for the Andre Simon Award for the book. He had to get £11,000 and he did that through social media and all sorts of things, and by pre-selling the book. So he has no advance, but once it's out, he can get £5 a copy of a certain one, and then when it's slightly less. So that's a sort of very quick example of how Unbound would work. And at the moment, Elizabeth Luard, who's a distinguished member of our guild, is crowdfunding a cook strip, it's called, and she's got 5% at the moment. But that's not a sort of time, as time sensitive as Kickstarter. So I thought I'd mention that.
She's doing Unbound as well.
Yes, she is. Yeah.
So Hattie, with Unbound, who's the publisher? Or Unbound?
Yeah.
And who has the rights?
I think they do.
I think they do, yeah.
Okay, that I'd have to say that feels to me like it takes away a major. Who has the rights with your
Unbound
books?
keeps the company. No.
I don't
No.
know.
I did that. Look in the imprint page of that.
Yeah, I don't actually know.
No,
All rights
no.
reserved.
The author owns the author owns the
Who's the
rights to all our books.
Right, Henry,
Yeah.
Can I say something? A reason for not crowdfunding, because the potential issue with crowdfunding, especially if you're mainly giving away pre-orders to your book, is that if you put it onto Amazon, then the people who would be buying it on Amazon have already got the book because they bought it as part of the crowdfunding deal. You see what I mean?
Right.
So you do lose a certain amount of your existing audience because they've already got the book. They're not going to go onto Amazon and buy it and push it into a chart. So that's a potential reason possibly for not crowdfunding.
That only really becomes, again, if you are though using the Amazon publishing portal, I think, because if you are supplying copies into Amazon as a mainstream, but you'll actually make so little money on the books you're selling with Amazon. It's much better to actually sell them like Bill selling them direct to the person and make the money. You won't get the sales ranking on Amazon, but it doesn't actually really matter if you're already making those sales elsewhere.
But once you get into a certain level of sales on Amazon, the book will start selling itself to the Amazon ecosystem. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you're missing out on that potential.
But
there's so little risk with crowdfunding. That's the massive advantage to it.
Yeah, but you've got to also remember that of those sales, you are only potentially making 30% of what they're selling it at. So if your production and printing costs are almost at that level, you're literally making 10 or 15.
Of course, for ebooks, it's like big money potentially you're losing.
Complicated business.
Yeah.
How do you get an ISBN if you're a self-publisher? Obviously, if you
buy it from Nielsen. You can just go to them and buy a single ISBN, or you can buy.
singles, you have to buy.
You have to buy 10 now.
Yeah, and it's considerably cheaper the more you buy per ISBN.
Given the integral nature of design and copy, and particularly the cookbook and visuals, what percentage of the cost of the book do you think the design might come to? And I suppose you went to a freelance designer and you said, okay, I want 100 recipes and I'll take the pictures, but or you'll help me think them through. What might be a reasonable number to allocate to that?
That's very difficult to say. It's like trying to say how much certain print aspects are.
That's assuming, Mark, that you're not free.
I'm not free. No, I mean with Bill, we made an agreement that I get a certain number of pounds per copy sold. And so I haven't been paid a penny yet, Bill.
He's leaving the country tomorrow, so.
And not to include, the ones that the Kickstarter awards. And from that point on, after that's been, those have been sort of paid, sent off. Then everything else from there. That's our particular arrangement, but it could be a completely different arrangement. If somebody was going to micro-publish something, they wanted a really beautiful design, but they were only going to sell X hundred of copies, that person would be funding that by an upfront payment. So it's only because I trust that this is going to sell in its hundreds of thousands that we've got this deal. So it's totally different.
It depends on whom you're hiring.
10 grand.
Yeah.
I think it depends. I think it's between 5 and 10 grand. But it's about 250 quid a page to some people, less than that. I'd say I tried self-publishing a couple of years ago and it was £9,000 for 200 pages.
And we're not quoting on
For the
doing
design-
that.
Just for the design.
Just for the design.
Yeah.
That's
Design is
Photography,
very
it's
expensive.
photography is about 5 to 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was going to say we don't quote on doing that. We quote on a sort of finished manuscript where you have had it designed ourselves. The bits we're doing is on the cover design, the typesetting, those kind of things. But on this kind of one, we did do a lot of this in the end ourselves. But it's a different model than the standard one I was talking about, where the one I was quoting you as the cookbook was finished files, which we were going to do the pre-press and then design a cover for and put that up, or that we were doing a non-illustrated one where the pre-press is a lot less.
Because that was my question. The numbers seem a bit odd because you've raised 15 grand.
Yeah.
But it's only £3 a copy, which is only £9,000 to make it.
Yeah.
Which seemed really cheap. But now I understand you haven't actually paid for a designer.
But my costs are already well over the 15 grand even
Yeah.
before I've paid for Michael.
Oh, exactly. That's what I was confused at because you said. So the £3 a copy is just for the print.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, fine. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking that was incredibly
Yeah,
cheap.
so no, the total costs are somewhere north of 20,000.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And the other thing about design, it depends on the book, because you can have a book that every page, every spread has got to be designed, or you can just design a format and you make sure that typeface is going to serve that job well. In terms of the cookbook, there was a lot of work on the editing side because of making things balance and fit so that there is a consistency of design throughout. So I didn't have to design every single page fresh. The basic format was designed and then it was run out, as it were.
Yeah.
So and sometimes people can do that themselves.
But it was absolutely eye-opening to me, being at Michael's side going through the design process and how much better, just looking at each page is better than than a lot of other cookbooks, but particularly than the cookbooks that I'd had published previously, which were supposedly designed by a large publishing house. So there's just something about the care and attention and time put into it.
Sorry,
No, go.
I was just going to say there's also a fashion element. I mean, one reason, Bill, why you looked at your books from the 90s and you think, ooh, that's not very good. At the time, that was hot. That's how books looked. I was just going to say on that principle that, so this is my one, oddly about the same size as Bill's, and this is how they all look now. They all look like this. It may be an argument for people who are looking to do their own books now to try and sort of think ahead of the curve and think, well, maybe everyone's had enough of these books where you just get recipe on the left, picture on the right, recipe on the right, picture on the left, and that's how they come out. There could be innovative and, dare I say, cheaper ways. It's still involving and very much depending on the design, but it might be one which doesn't have a great lot of illustrations, has some, perhaps it has hand line drawings or all sorts of different ways of thinking about the size and things. It should be quite interesting, because that could make it cheaper to do and get underway.
One of the most obvious ways is basically the cheapest. I mean, the cookery list that Feiden put together was done as art books, and they were very much, but they spent an absolute fortune on it. But the amount of people who would then rip off that design afterwards because they thought that really worked for what I want to do, and you can reproduce it actually following on from that, and people do. They look really good as a result.
I mean, square picture with text underneath isn't hard to format, but properly designed interiors is where the cost comes from.
It seems to me that listening to you all is what self-publishing or assisted publishing works best for those with people who've got a clear audience and market. It's no good just thinking I have a book until you can't get a handle on the cost, and so you've actually understood how many people do you think you can sell to.
I think that's true, but then the person who doesn't have a clear idea of their audience is not going to find a conventional publisher either.
Yeah.
The person who doesn't have an audience is stuffed, basically.
And some people just want to have their book out there in the world, and I respect that entirely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But also, it's also having something original to say, because the easiest thing for us to market and to sell and to be successful with is someone who's publishing into a niche area where they've come up with it. And some of our most successful books are, I mean, one I did one was on the railways of North Devon. But I mean, he did a fantastic book on that. There is a niche out there, and he sold fantastically well. He did a huge, wonderful hardback on it. If you come up with a cookbook which is on something original and new and different, and you're doing it to the right audience who are going to respond to that, and you do a bit of a marketing campaign or whatever, it will work, because what always publishing is looking for is something original and new, and everyone will then copy it afterwards. So you can do it. It's just that you can't do it if you're just kind of saying, I want to do a nice cookery book on roast and 2 veg or something, because it's been done before. But if you can come up with something new and original and tie it into something else, you'll have a market. And if you've got a helpful start, that's great. But you can do it also if you just come up with a really original idea and get it happening.
So that meat and 2 veg one, that's good.
Yeah. No, it's been done before. Did it with Tom Parker Bowles.
It's coming round again.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
There's drinks and a few canapes next door.
Okay, let me just wrap up. First of all, with a point of my own, you might, someone contemplating doing this might try to save money by not having an editor. Big mistake. Big mistake. No author ever turned in a perfect manuscript. And sometimes, I mean, I know you like the control, but sometimes an editor
I would absolutely echo that.
Good, great. Okay, let me just thank a few people. Let me say also that those books are far too heavy for Bill to carry back. So you lighten his load. I'd like, excuse me, doing a Theresa May here.
The sign's got to fall down behind you.
As long as it's not a bottle. Thank the usual people, our saintly, priceless administrator, Jonathan. All the incredibly hardworking members of the committee. I hope that all guild members realize how much work they all do on their behalf. And in this context, I'd like especially to thank Hattie, the organizer, Hattie Ellis. Clap. This great lineup, and thank you to all of our speakers. Clap louder for them. And now, drink loudly.
There we go.